This is a very different format for us. So those of you who've been to other conferences, etc., this isn't a conference. This is a roundtable, a discussion. All of you are equals around this room. That's why, hence, you're all in different locations, but you're all here to debate collectively, both individually and as a community. We absolutely treasure the fact that even if you are, a minister of state, head of a voluntary sector, or a private sector leader, you all have valid comments to make, and this is about the collective brain around this room to talk about the biggest challenges that we're facing in Europe. Obviously, we want to talk about a social, progressive, economically sustainable Europe and how we get there. But I suppose there's a phrase that the British use a lot that, a week is a long time in politics. But by goodness, 48 hours has changed our world, has changed the character of our world, if you like. And many of us had hoped not to wake up yesterday with the news that we all woke up to. Some of us still had hope that hope would win, and that we wouldn't be, I suppose, dealt a blow to potential a world safety and security. And, hey, people say it's democracy, and it is democracy. A landslide vote, on a level, we never imagined. So something's gone wrong, and many people probably don't understand actually what went wrong really, other than the fact that perhaps we don't understand voting behavior as much as we think we do, or that we don't understand people's hopes, concerns, and fears, and we take that for granted often. And many, and I think that I said this before, I think whilst the left did a good job, for too long the left has been fat, complacent, and lazy, and taken for granted its mandate, unfortunately, and has really not taken the time out to really understand the grain of how people feel. When you are not in this room, those are people who are literally half a kilometre away from here, who are struggling to pay their bills. We have 50 million people in energy poverty in Europe. That's even a conservative guess. 50 million people in energy poverty. A lot of young people are in their 20s and late 20s are living with their parents still in a way that none of us had to, because they simply can't get on the housing ladder, if you like. Unemployment amongst particular groups of, let's say, not in education, training or skills are significant in Europe, and most of our cities are burgeoning with the pressure of overpopulation. Climate is obviously accelerating. Europe is the fastest warming continent area in Europe. So you saw what happened. A year's rainfall in one day, in 8 hours in Valencia, and see what happened as a result. These are just some of the issues that we need to be thinking about as we contend with the two reports. They're almost like they're worry beads, Draghi letter. Everyone's talking about these two significant reports that are telling us, perhaps some of us might think, telling us what we already know. And sometimes we might think it's quite a clever ruse to get an ex-prime minister and a politician to independently cast a gaze on what's wrong with Europe and what it should do, because it gives it a bit more credibility. But the things about needing to have reform of the way in which the institutional apparatus works, making sure you invest in R&D. We continue to be laggards. China, Russia, US and Japan spend more on R&D than we do as a percentage of their GDP. That's been the case for the past 10 years, and look where they are. But we refuse to really step up the game on R&D. We continue to be players where we seed innovation, but then China or the United States accelerate at a speed that we can't compete with somehow, because our regulatory framework doesn't allow for speed, if you like. That's not to suggest that we should deregulate and create greater risk, but there's smarter ways of working. And I suppose both the letter Draghi report are talking about greater scale, speed, and smartness. One obviously refers to having 800 billion needed for us to move forward. I'm not an economist, but I think there's lots of money in the system that's not being used wisely. I think the fact that you've got so much underspent on the Resilience and Recovery Fund, we have the largest R&D fund in the world, Horizon, but we don't promote it. Most people don't know about that, but it's huge. But is it spent in a smart way? So these are kind of the issues that we need to be thinking about. And I think that both the letter and Draghi report make reference to infrastructural levers, But the reason why I make the other points about poverty, housing, the state of education, for example, are that those are the things that will matter if we're to grow in a substantial and an inclusive manner, as opposed to having winners and very big losers in the system. And I think if we've learned anything from voting behavior, especially in the past 25 years, it's at our peril that we don't listen to, engage with those who feel completely left out, unheard and unrepresented, and therefore we get the shifts that we do in politics. And I think that we are, we need to think long and hard. And I'm not just talking about a margin. There's a very big population out there that don't feel that we here, we're basically talking a lot of nonsense and wasting public money, and feel that actually that what they need, what they would like to see happen and to be actually engaged in, simply we're irrelevant. And I think that we need to become more relevant and be more listening, if you like, and more engaging of the communities that feel the worst and obviously the most left out of the system. So those are the kind of issues I think we are going to have to talk about. And whilst the Letter and Draghi report are detailed, they're almost like, they're scientific in their own way, but they sometimes leave out the people dimension. And I think that we need to be thinking about that more dramatically in this debate. So there we go. I know all of you will have a view on what the US election means for all of us. I don't want that to deflect from the debate that we need to have now, but I do know that that's going to be weighing heavily on all of us. It was quite interesting. Those of you who were there last night at our President's dinner, we had Mr. Monti, Mario Monti. Is he here? I can't see him. Perhaps he'll arrive. But he was brilliant. It was a barnstorming speech. And he was very clear that, you know what we should be thinking about is stop looking to the West, think differently about Europe's future, be more self-deterministic, and do not rely on partners that are unreliable, and you're going to have to change how you are and how you behave, because actually the world we find ourselves in is far more predictable, risk-prone and crisis-driven, and we cannot continue to operate as a union that somehow has to follow or be bound to a unfaithful partner. And we need to get a grip about that and actually begin to be much more savvy and work with partners such as looking south and the east rather than constantly looking to the west. So your views will be welcome on that. Without further ado, we have a really excellent lineup of, let's say, kickstarting conversation people that come from various fields. As you know, one of the things that we do at Friends of Europe is to bring public, private, civil society actors around the room to have a debate, because that's what we feel is the only way to have a good discussion about policy and what's going on in the world. I also want to welcome all of those of you who are online. Thank you for joining us. And if you want to ask a question or raise an issue, please use hashtag State of Europe and you'll get through to us. And so firstly, I want to start with somebody who needs no introduction, and that's you, Margrethe. I'm so glad that you're here with us. I mean, I think that you're a woman of history. The things you've done are fantastic and amazing. You've kind of stood up to big tech companies and you've made people pay tax in a way they never imagined that companies would do. And you've been, I suppose, criticized for being anti-business, which you're not. And what's interesting is that you've been able to be a guardian of people's privacy, but also ensure the private sector can be accountable. And we know that from our citizen survey, so we surveyed 2,024 citizens tail end of last year, and there's a report that you can download as a result. It was quite interesting. Majority of the citizens across 7 member states believed in the institution, but didn't believe the politician who would do the right thing. They feel that the solutions are out there, but vested interests are too high. There's greater trust in the institutions of the EU. So it was quite interesting that most of the people across the 7 member states said that they believed in the institution of the EU, didn't trust their national states as much. And the third was the private sector, because they felt that they wouldn't be selfless enough to move forward in creating a better society. So given your experience and what you've done, and now you can be more, I suppose, open to being frank, if you like. Not that you've ever not been frank, but What's your view on you've got both these reports, but putting those aside, this mantra of competition and being competitive, being more kind of moving on an economic growth trajectory, whilst that's important, how do we balance that with ensuring that social protection matters to us?
Well, thank you very much. There's a lot to unpack in what you just, your introduction to us and your comments. I think the most important thing is to stay loyal to the European model, which is to create prosperity and translate that into welfare for everybody. That's the idea. And that is what has made Europe the best place to live ever in history, and especially if you're a woman. And if we want to give that up now, I'm absolutely certain that we will lose. Because we're not like the Chinese, we're not like the Americans, we're Europeans. And I think we would be lousy Chinese. We don't have it. And actually, I don't think we would be that good Americans either. And it's really, really important that we look at our model and develop it. Because for a very long time, we let ourselves be dependent on Russian gas, as we were, on processed raw materials from China. We need to figure out how to reinterpret our model in these days that we live in. Trump won a landslide victory. Everything. With a massive turnout. I think it's really important to register that, but it's also really important not to try to factor that in already before we know. Because part of the Trump deal is uncertainty and playing with people, trying to make them do things that they would otherwise not have done, just trying to predict the future. I think it's really important that we focus on creating our own future. And the thing is that competition and competitiveness, they're two sides of the same coin. You cannot have competitiveness without competition. The thing is that you can actually have competition without competitiveness, but it takes much more. And we have shown in recent history that we can solve crises when they are in our face. The life and death of the pandemic, the problems of really cold living rooms and home for the elderly and hospitals during the energy crisis. We were there on the first day of the brutal invasion by Russia of Ukraine, housing refugees, enabling their defense, supporting the Ukrainian state. The crisis of competitiveness is something that has happened over time. It erodes a bit every day. Rebuilding it takes a different focus. And since we are not good at focusing long-term, doing difficult things, politicians very easily get distracted by new and shiny stuff. I think we should take this situation as the thing to focus minds in order for Europe to focus on regaining our competitiveness and partner up with some parts of the world that we have not strong enough endorsed. That be India, that be a number of countries on the African continent and the African Union in particular, in order to show that this is not an isolated Europe. This is a Europe that wants to partner up with the rest of the world, welcoming what other people can offer, hopefully being able to offer them some things as well. And in that respect, I think we have a lot going for ourselves. On, of course, the assumption, and that is a daring assumption, that we can agree, find compromise among ourselves, that we will implement those compromises in real life, and that we will do it with speed. Because very often, in all three instances, we do the opposite. We do not agree. If eventually we agree, we do not implement. And anyway, it has taken us a decade. So if we could just end that, now when the situation demands it from us, we would do a great thing to Europe.
There are some errant knaves in the pile, aren't there, though? in terms of when we think about is that point you've just made, that we know that there are certain member states that want to be part of the club as far as a marketplace, but don't actually share the values, and it's getting worse, if you like. And I think that when you make the point you do about the fact that we can be good at this, you know you've been there where you've seen adversity from certain member states that confound and strangulate progress. What do you, as you move on, what would you see as the reforms that need to take place so that we're not held hostage to Orbanesque type of approaches or those who do not share the central value base of the EU project?
But the thing is that we will not have those reforms within the next 3 months. And we need them because there might be member states who are encouraged, emboldened by the Trump victory.
Indeed.
So that's what I want to have, because that will make me, much stronger, much more powerful than I am today. So I think there is no other way to go than what we have done in this mandate under the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen, which is to do the follow the money. If there is not a guarantee that our common funds, because the taxpayers from all over Europe pay these funds, if they cannot be guaranteed to be well managed because of problems of rule of law, they cannot be paid out. And that is something that we have done already. So we know how to do it, which means that we can do it again, and we can do it faster than we have done it previously. And of course, we should do that, because the reform that we need takes a new treaty, because the one obvious thing that we need in a new treaty is that countries can be kicked out again. What we got in the last one was that it became obvious how you can leave. I think we also need to make sure that it's obvious how you can be kicked out of the Union again. But everybody knows that that kind of reform, that kind of new treaty is at least a decade down the line.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll come back to you. I'm sure there's lots of questions in the room to you, and I will make sure we've got time to do that. I want to move to MGI, yourself, Sylvain. So you work with the sector, private sector. You provide a lot of data analysis day in, day out, and you know the tick, I suppose, of a lot of CEOs across Europe and elsewhere. We've had these two reports. What's your take on the issue of being competitive, but still having a clear value base, a social protection base? Because there's a lot of people that, whether you go to some of the top 5 companies that advise Europe will say, you know what, the social protection net is making you anti-competitive. Your costs are too high, you need to reduce that, so therefore the private sector can invest and therefore dump some of your values. What's your view on that?
Thanks, Dharmendra. So can we be competitive and social, right? Let's just do a thought experiment of saying we just want to be competitive, inequality, tear down the safety nets, have our own version of the Wild West. But that's not the European culture. That's not the social contract. And not who we are, right? We're proud, for example, Europe leads on a lot of social indicators, right? We're the top 10 countries in terms of social mobility are European countries. We have the highest life expectation, and so on and so on. So just being competitive is not going to work with what we are. So the other extreme, can we be just social, right? And define social the way you want, being caring for the older generation, the pension, access to education, access to healthcare, you name it. But for that, we need resources. We need to finance it. And to generate these resources, this financing, we need to be an attractive business place. We need to be competitive. And so, yes, we can be both, but it's more than that. To be social, we need to be competitive so we can finance our social model. And, at a time where business cycles are accelerating, we need to continuously stimulate the growth, the innovation, and we need investments. That's the lifeblood of competitiveness. And just to illustrate this, one of our McKinsey Global Institute research, right? Let's just say, if we invest more in technology in Europe and we become way more competitive, we have a lag on this, right, as we know. And let's assume we get our fair market share from an economic stance point of view on technology. That over the next 20 years in our models would lead to 2 to 4 trillion of value creation from the corporates. That's that's almost 30 to 70% of the GDP growth that is planned for Europe in the next 20 years. That in itself could be extremely sort of, it pays 90%, an order of magnitude, it pays 90% of social expenditures. It would pay 6 times for what we estimate to need to go to net zero. And so investing allows us, and creating wealth allows us to be social in the end. And so we need to be both.
And it's possible from your
Yes.
perspective. Because that's the argument is from the top, the top companies that advise politicians, especially at member state and elsewhere, say, you should perhaps reduce the cost that you have on, because 40% of member states' expenditure is on social protection across the board, as an average, between 40 and 45% of their GDP is on social protection. And so they would argue, actually, you could reduce that if you were to think differently about the protection element. So, what you say is absolutely fine in terms that you can do both, but how would you, what do you say to argue against the point that you can do both, but what would be the particular levers of doing that?
Don't get me wrong, we need to be competitive.
Yes.
We need to create the conditions to be competitive. We need to avoid the fragmentation, and there are many levers we can discuss. That allows us to create the value we need, not to fall behind. And with this, we can decide in Europe as we like, and that's a social contract, to be social. Great,
thank you. I'm so glad you talked about the social contract, because that's exactly what we're about. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to a politician from Portugal. And so I'm going to just come around here so I can look at you. Thank you very much for joining us. One of the issues that is the age-old bug within the system of the EU is there's a meism and a us, but the meism sometimes takes over. What I mean is member state interests versus EU interests. At the time that we find ourselves right now, where Mr. Trump might pick and choose and say, "Come and play," and people say, "Yeah, okay, I need the money," we will perhaps slowly break down the edifice, the beauty of what the project is. How do you're in the cabinet, you have a significant portfolio, balancing the needs of your member state, your country, with the EU-wide project in terms of competition and being competitive, when the one thing that we haven't mentioned so far is public debt is the highest it's ever been in history. I mean, IMF and others have said that, most countries are high up to debt. We've got cities going bankrupt, universities going bankrupt, etc. So how do you square that circle, if you like? And I know that's a difficult question, but what's your take on the member state versus EU project? And is there a greater beauty of being with the project rather than simply thinking about your own subsidiarity?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Yes, I think all in this room believe that we are better together and we'll get farther away if we are together. How can we do? One is to be a bit tolerant to the inevitability of different countries having different historical, political, even personal ties with different powerhouses across the world. It's part of the game. We are not one single country. We have histories, political profiles, and so there is a part of it that is normal, and we have to stand it. But how can we move together and move fast? It's like a bicycle. If we stop pedaling, we fall. If we stop pedaling and we stop moving and we stop delivering for our people, wolves will find cyclists that stop pedaling, that they can find to deflect and to defect the group and the pack. So the strategy should be moving, and moving in two directions. Not only, and yesterday's dinner, there was a lot of talk about doing more things together. Things that we find in all reports for the past 2 decades or so that we still have to do. We have to do more in defense. We have to do more in finance. Try to change the fragmentation we have, create larger, single, serious markets in those aspects. In energy, for instance, just to give you an example, in Iberia, we have renewable energy powerhouse in potential. We can produce wind on and offshore in massive quantities, with solar energy as well. Possibilities. A, we don't develop those and we don't have those resources because we lack financing, we lack speediness in licensing and so on. Hypothesis one, we don't have the potential. Hypothesis B, we do, but we cannot export that cheap renewable energy to Europe. So we start attracting industrial production that we are outcompeting other European countries. So again, playing by the national interest. Hypothesis three, we build much more capable electricity grid connections to the rest of Europe, so we can export to the rest of Europe our cheap green renewable energy. What has been done in the past 10 years about that? Almost nothing. So that is one area where we should do more things together. Energy, finance, defense, and so on. But we also have to know that countries need to be capable of doing more things by themselves. And usually we talk about red tape hindering the potential and the speediness of our decisions. If you allow me, I will talk about blue tape, blue like the colors in the European flag. We should know that with our good intention to protect important values, greening our economies, protecting consumers, privacy, we have created layers and layers of blue tape that are hindering the speed, the capability of investing as we should in renewables again, in supplying housing that our population need, healthcare and schools that need renovation, security for our people. And so what I would suggest is that as a challenge to the Brussels bubble, think at the same time what we can do together in all those projects of greater integration, but what should we undo together? GDPR, maybe we went too far. Land use rules, public tendering rules that basically we have the new next generation EU delayed everywhere. Why? Because we cannot just not deploy our investments because it takes too long with all the amount of blue tape again. Well-intentioned rules, but are dragging us behind. So if we combine things that we do together and capability of doing things by ourselves faster, maybe we deliver what citizens want, and they want to be in our bicycle because our bicycle moves, and we want to be with the others. We will be delivering purchase power, housing, healthcare, security, and education.
Okay, that's fairly controversial about blue tape, and I'll come to that in a moment. But you're part of a network of other ministers across Europe. You meet regularly with others. So it's quite interesting that a lot of when we've had other ministers here, they'll say, that's the problem. And you think, who's the problem then? You know, who actually gets the thing done as a result? Because everyone can point the finger. And so what would you do as a part of a ministerial grouping to say, let's get our acts together, guys, mostly guys, and move it forward? So
yeah, two things. One, avoid adding excessive blue tape in new decisions. Second, moving forward on those collective projects. For instance, every time that we meet with other ministers, prime ministers, leaders of government, for instance, about energy, focusing on this, building up this Iberian electricity connection to the European grid. Build up these projects together. We have to have these two conversations all at the same time.
So would you be willing to give up something that's of a national interest for a collective interest? So we know the grid doesn't work. There is no grid, fine-tuned grid that can ensure that Europe could play differently and better. And one of the things that you see in the Draghi report and the letter report that we need greater connectivity on so many levels, whether that's the grid or whether that's to do with our railway network or all sorts of things. But subsidiarity and sovereignty of member states seem to not to push in the direction of wanting to give up a little bit to get a bigger gain.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It's still about energy and the Draghi report.
Yes.
For instance, Portugal has probably the largest lithium reserves in Europe.
Indeed.
Within the European Union for certain. We have to make the difficult choice about allowing large pits to be open in our rural area, or tap this resource that will be important for Portugal in a sense, but largely for the potential European battery industry and EVs industry in Europe. Are we able and interested in fighting our local communities if they are reluctant and try to convince them and drag them along? Yes, we are. Pool these lithium resources to the European community and include them in a European-wide strategy. But we need to move on all fronts. It's not only about we extract lithium and what? And then we fight with Germany and Spain who gets the refinery, and then we start producing more renewables, and we cannot export cheap energy to Poland and Hungary and so on. They are getting gas from elsewhere. We should do all, sometimes together, other times by ourselves, but considering the global interest for sure of Europe.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to come back to you in a moment. Just to think about, and this is not for you to answer right away, is that what's your view on increasing the own resources budget? At the moment, the model of just, VAT and like tax like that, is it really sustainable for the future? But think about that. Margaret, I could see your face when are you the queen of the blue tape?
Yeah, I'd happily take that title. I'm looking for a new one, so why not? I think it's really, really important to have nuance here, because not you, but when others says, oh, we have so much regulation. Stemming from the treaty to preventing lead in toys and everything in between. Part of the regulation that I've been championing is market creating. The Digital Markets Act creates market access for smaller companies and for big ones, or those who are dependent on gatekeepers. It's a market creating vehicle. If you look at the Digital Services Act, well, it makes sure that what has been agreed in member states with national sovereignty, what is illegal, what cannot be said and done, child abuse, incitement to terrorism, really bad things, is actually being upheld. Because we have no content regulation at a European level, we're just providing the security that what has been decided nationally actually is also being upheld in our virtual world. If you look at the AI Act, we regulate risks. And that is market creating as well, because it means that the public sector, which is gigantic in Europe, can safely use artificial intelligence to be much more effective than what it otherwise were. So just to give you 3 examples of where regulation actually is market creating, enabling national interest to play out in full. And I think it's a really important discussion, because very often bureaucracy is a way of balancing interests. It's not there because, something have had the evil idea that things should take longer. It's there because we have different interests. We have opposing interests. Those who care deeply about birds and other flying living creature, and those who want to make sure that they can have their next factory built as fast as possible. So the regulation is there to try to balance these interests, which means that we need everybody at the table when we figure out how to do this faster and more efficient, because there is an obvious need to be faster and more efficient in permitting. Sometimes you need 20, 25 permits to expand your business, and it takes ages. When the Swedes opened their presidency, they did that with telling that they have found almost any critical mineral needed up North Sweden. Great news. Do you know when they will start exploiting that? In 10 years' time. In 10 years' time, they will be ready with all the permitting needed. That obviously is a huge problem, because if we want to have partnership with resource-rich countries outside of Europe, we also need to show that we can exploit the resources that we have ourselves. also when it comes with a cost. And this is why we need everybody around the table in order to renew that part of the social contract, which is how do we balance different interests? And then we can move forward, because otherwise we just get the endless court cases. You know, for more than a decade, it has been planned to have a connection between Denmark and Germany over the Fehmarn Belt. That has been held up in court, I think, ever since the decision was made. So it's not enough to have better, faster permitting. We also need to get people on board for the courts not to take the upholding position that we are now saying, oh, it's all these permitting authorities. So we have a lot of things to do it fast, but we cannot do it without having everybody around the table and saying, listen, this is really what we want. And when we renew the social contract, we need to take that into consideration. And I think that is the important point here, because I completely agree with that balancing act between member states and the union. But just, I know it has, everybody says it all the time, but it needs to be said again. We have spent 10 years and the capital market still does not work, ought to be first priority. We have a single market with the vehicle of creating prosperity. It still doesn't work in full because all kinds of barriers keep creeping in, and a lot of them, they have a member state sender. Just a little bit, just tiny more environmental protection. Who doesn't want that? Yeah, but it means that businesses have to repackage their products in order to sell them over the border. So I think also in that, there is the need to sort of reconcile and stop the rhetorics and get down to business to say, what is it really that it takes, and are we willing to do that? Because we talk a lot in Europe. And that is great, because that is the starting point of finding compromise. But we also need to get to the compromise and then to implement it. But it's just to say that not all regulation is bad, and there will be more in the coming mandate. You know, you have seen the political guidelines. I just also hope that the next mandate will be an implementing mandate.
Indeed.
We really, really need great legislation passed by, you know, publicly elected officials in the European Parliament and in Council to be fully respected, put into full effect. And that takes 100 times more political leadership than to pass legislation, which is difficult enough. Because what happens when you pass legislation, you change perception. When you start implementing, you change behavior. And nobody likes that. This is why it takes leadership.
Indeed.
And there's a lot of room for national leadership in getting that job done.
Thank you for that. I want you to think about this question that I don't want you to answer right now, is that you've spoken about the need for, in my term, bracing conversations that are to the point about the kind of problems we need to overcome. It's almost we need a project management methodology to some of these issues, which would actually be the tipping point for acceleration and change in how we work. But you sit in a college, and you have sat in a college of commissioners. What kind of conversations are you having on this topic? Because I'm scratching my head thinking, okay, you know this, but so do some of the others. So what are you guys doing, guys and women, doing about it when you're having meetings regularly? Is it because the stuff of everyday management is in your face, so you can't look further? But it's something I'd like to come back to. I want to move to a household brand, Coca-Cola. We have Coca-Cola in the room, and we have a senior vice president from Coca-Cola here. Rami, it's good to have you back. And, you know, obviously you've read this document back to back. And by the way, the company has circulated this document to all their directors. I'm very proud to tell you that. So I'm very grateful that you've done that. No, but yeah, I know you have. One of the choices in here we say is about the private sector should become a shareholder in creating a better society. We've had all these discussions about PPI. We know there's been, you know, lots of debates over decades about how do you get public-private sector partnerships better? And is it time now to change how that's done? But can you envisage a way of working that the private sector becomes a problem solver upstream with government, rather than downstream as an implementer and making money only. So what we're saying as a part of a new social contract is that the private sector could play a different role in working with government and municipalities to solve some of our biggest challenges. Because you guys, the private sector owns 70% of infrastructure in Europe. I mean, there's a great deal for how we deal with a number of things that are ahead of us. So over to you on that.
Super. Thank you, Dharmendra, for having me back. This is my second year. So last year, I remember we woke up, started the session, and we had a collapse of the Portuguese government. This year, we wake up to the German news. I'm wondering whether you're going to invite me next year. So let me put it that way. But as I said, it's good to be back. The short answer to your question is absolutely. We have a very important role to play. And let me just talk through the role of the private sector, the expectations of the private sector from a company like Coca-Cola, and the partnership question that you've asked about. We are a global multinational that thinks globally and acts locally. We've been in Europe for 100 years, and we want to make sure that we create the right conditions to keep driving growth and create value and help the economy in Europe prosper for the next 100 years, if not more. We're here to stay. That's why we're really glad and we find strong alignment with a renewed EU vision. One where competitiveness, environmental, and social sustainability all reinforce one another. Think of it as a stool with 3 legs. They don't compete against each other. They all help each other bring stability and strength. So the challenges, though, that we see in Europe, some of them have been mentioned before, whether they are boosting the economy, tackling climate change, promoting social cohesion, they're real. They're here today. And so really the first message to land for me is that to solve them, we really do need to think differently. And that mindset shift is required for moving to surviving to thriving. And this idea of it's not one party benefits, but actually we can create co-benefits for both private and public sector. So let me give you just an example of, and I'll talk about circularity. That's one example where here in Europe, we're pretty proud about what we're achieving together in the environment we're operating in. So when it comes to circularity, we've actually, as an industry, the soft drinks industry, we've invested a fair bit to make sure that our packaging is fully recyclable. That allows us to reduce our plastic footprint and our carbon footprint. Just a stat for you, 22% of consumers are what we call eco-actives. An eco-active consumer is somebody that basically votes with their wallets. They will buy products just because they're ecological or sustainable. They have 500 billion euros to spend. That number reaches about 40% in countries like Germany of eco-active consumers. So these consumers, regardless of the macro environment, regardless of the economy, regardless of the setting they're in, that number is increasing, but they're willing to spend money because they're driving an ecological solution. And so when it comes and so that creates broader societal benefits. As a consequence of driving this recyclability, we've got now factories in Europe that process plastic, they recycle plastic, and they allow everybody to just basically get the bottle back in their hand over and over again. Linked to that, we've been partnering with the governments and launching deposit return schemes. And we've now seen them in multiple countries. I believe we have them now live in 9 countries. It's been successful. There's other countries, actually, 16 countries have them live, 9 countries are in progress. Just to give you an example, last year, I think Romania, Malta launched. This year, Ireland, and I believe Hungary launched. When Ireland launched, again, very low collection rates. Today, they are collecting 74% of their packaging. 2 years ago, Slovakia launched very low collection rates. Today, 2 years later, over 90% of the packaging is being collected and going back into the circular streams. So again, circularity can be successful, can benefit everybody. What happens is you reduce your reliance on raw materials, you reduce the depletion of natural resources, and everybody in the community can benefit. So that's just one big statement to land. What I wanted to say as well is we also need, it's not enough because we also need the public sector to create the right framework for us to operate in. Mm-hmm. And let me give you a couple specific examples. And here we're talking about, the right policy frameworks. So if you go through the Draghi report, he calls that innovation. And innovation is something that we're very passionate about. Without innovation as a company, we die. Very simple. And there were a couple of stats in there. He was quite damning when he spoke about that Europe needs to radically innovate. And there were a couple of stats that he called out about the dire state in Europe. He said, in the last 5 decades, no EU company worth more than 100 billion has been created from scratch. Second one he said is that 30% of Europe's unicorns, these are companies that end up being worth more than $1 billion, have left the EU since 2008. I mean, that's pretty damning. And they've left for multiple reasons. They've left because blue tape, red tape, you call it, but they've left because they found it easier to scale their companies elsewhere. So when it comes to innovation, we, as some of you may be aware, we have a big R&D facility here in Brussels. We hire and work with over 80 scientists, researchers. It's been very successful. We launch over hundreds of products, reformulations, packaging, packageless, you name it. Well, we know innovation. We know innovation, and so we know how it's done. And the point here is that for innovation to be successful, there's really 3 things that we would ask. One is you need to accelerate the process. It just takes too long. And to use an example outside of our industry, to get an application through the EU's novel foods regulation takes up to 3 years with the Food Safety Authority, up to 3 years. In the US, it takes 6 months.
Yeah.
Now, we're not saying it has to take 6 months.
No.
You have to have regulatory boundaries. But what's happening is companies are choosing to go to Singapore, they're choosing to go to Canada, they're choosing to go elsewhere because it's just not fast enough. And so that's one thing what's the right balance to innovate faster? 2, we want to partner more with institutions. We have some of the best universities in Europe. Top universities globally, top scientists, and they're getting stronger. How do we partner better? How do we create those opportunities? How do we protect IPs? How do we encourage that ecosystem where startups can thrive? And 3, we just need to trust and uphold evidence-based policymaking, and believe in what the science is telling us. So that's just one point in innovation. And if I may, let me just go to the last point, because the last point I want to talk about, which brings me to why I'm always happy about being here in this community of Friends of Europe, to make sure we have, we need to ensure that we are collaborating in the right way, we have the right platforms, and that we, to your point, are part of the solution upstream and not downstream, which is why we welcome the occasions such as this one. Their new social contract is really important for us. We actually did circulate it within our boards, at least within our leadership team in Europe, and it does really resonates. We welcome Commission President von der Leyen's call to engage with us, for the commissioners to engage with us and ask us our opinion. And we also believe that our brands play a very, very important role. We have seen through history, through wars, again, we've been around for 138 years, brands can offer optimism, brands can offer creativity, brands can offer social cohesion. Thank you.
Coca-Cola. Okay, right.
Or
that was a great branding job.
Or Fontaine.
No, but the thing for me is that we need to think about is that which member state has actually reached out to you and say, give us a bit of your R&D knowledge? Which member state has spoken to you and say, actually, we need to accelerate our green transition. How can you help us? It'd be interesting. I don't want you to answer that question, but why does that conversation or question not arise? And that's my issue here, is that we know the private sector invests far more than public sector on R&D. Rather than spending public taxpayers' money, why don't we just use a bit of yours and collect it more aggressively? So, but let's come back to that in a moment. I want to open this up, and I know there's someone who's been looking at me. It's lovely to see you. Please introduce yourself and what your point is, because I know you have this issue about what he's been talking about scale up and acceleration. So.
Yeah, hi, Henrietta Moon. I'm a climate tech entrepreneur, venture-backed and so forth. We build biocarbon factories. But today I want to talk about the tech point and competitiveness. A friend of mine is working on this amazing initiative called EU Inc. And essentially, it's a one-stop entity for the entire Europe. And after a slush in Helsinki in a couple of weeks with Europe's leading unicorn founders, VCs, everybody, this report will be sent to Draghi and a suggestion for what this new entity could look like. Because right now, if you want to build a company and you want to start an entity, if you want an entity that every VC in the world knows, it's a Delaware Inc. And there's nobody starts any other companies in the US. It's always a Delaware Inc. We don't have that in Europe. So VCs need to learn what the Finnish Inc. looks like, what the Danish Inc. looks like, what the Italian Inc. right? So we need a single entity that can be competitive. My question to you, Commissioner, how do we get that through in a couple of years? Because, that's really something that would be so practical and help entrepreneurs really start companies faster, simpler, with one thing, one set of legal papers, just get it done.
Okay, this is not, as I said, this is not a classic conference where speakers and questions, etc. Because I'd be interested in your view, but also other people's view on, because there are millions of entrepreneurs in Europe, right? In terms of how can you kind of become a community of change by actually knocking on the door?
We're making this suggestion. So
right.
Europe's leading tech entrepreneurs and VCs are pulling together something that looks like, hey, this is what the entity needs to look like. Can we please bring this to life? And this is really to compete with,
Last time it rained. Not at this time, at midday. It poured. Now we've got a concert. I do apologize. There's nothing we can do about that, I'm afraid. Unless, no, we can't.
But in any case, I mean, a lot of my friends who started tech companies that have been successful started in Delaware straight away, even if they're European, in Europe, because it's just the one entity that's known. So we need one entity that's known in Europe. It's very simple, but how do we put it into practice, I guess? And just want to open it to the floor because if I'm not being clear, but it's essentially when you start a company, you have to go with some jurisdiction, you have to put the paperwork together and so forth and so on. So if it was standardized across Europe into one, that would make it a lot faster and cheaper and more efficient, and every single venture capitalist would know it.
Cheeky buggers, they must know we've got a conference on, they're just turning the volume up.
It's just the background for my pitch.
Absolutely. Yeah. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Arietta. I couldn't agree more with what you just said. I'm a startup founder myself, climate tech too. I guess we're a couple of those in the room. I love to talk politics at the disco.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Nicholas Bryan, so I'll try to speak up. There are some governments on this continent and some people in this city who are very proud when they say, my debt is 60% to GDP. And apparently they seem to be okay with living with delayed trains, crumbling infrastructures, a recession, and carbon-intensive Mittelstand. When we look at the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, they have no problem having debt to GDP at 120%. They have the lowest rate of unemployment ever. They have never opened that many factories as in 2023. And tech companies are fueled with government tenders and contracts. And so my question to some of the great experts that just spoke before me, are we ready to acknowledge the fact that as part of the Draghi report and its recommendation to spend 800 billion a year in additional debt, are we ready to fuel the digital transition and the green transition with additional debt? Thank you so much.
And is that what you... I mean, that's a good... I mean, obviously, the question is for everybody, not just the experts that have spoken so far. Do you think that that's the best route forward? Is that what you're advocating? That get more debt, don't worry about it, and just move forward? Is that what you're saying?
I believe we've been a little bit naive in Europe over the past years. We have thought that the very definition of a startup and a tech company is 3 people with hoodies in a garage. And the last time I went to Israel, I talked to one of these very seasoned entrepreneurs, and he told me, yeah, Europeans are crazy. They believe that a tech company is 3 people with hoodies in a garage. In Israel, we know for sure that a real tech company is 3 people with hoodies in a garage at the Ministry of Defense. And I found that funny because he was clearly putting a link between government spending and building great tech companies. And if we look at the success of the Silicon Valley, it's not just people with hoodies in a garage, it's people with hoodies in a garage fueled with government contracts. That's the very story of Elon Musk, that's the very story of Palantir, that's the very story of some of the greatest companies. And yeah, I've been through the same road with Arietta. I'm backed by US investors, but clearly money and capital is not enough. I need to sign contracts, not necessarily with the government, but I need to sign contracts. And when we are in climate tech, working on the green transition, and we are talking about water, and we're talking about waste management, these are very much related to government contracts and tenders. So that was my point.
Okay.
More capital is great. More clients is even better.
Okay. So those of you who want to speak, either raise your hands or use the bottle or something to get my attention. But I'm trying to make sure I can see everyone, and I will come to you. I want to make sure I go around the room, so I will come to you, I promise, in a moment. But this gentleman has been very patient. Is there a mic? Great. Do introduce yourself.
Thank you. Is it working now? Okay, turning it on would be a good idea. Hi, Nick Mabey. I'm CEO of E3G, which is a climate change think tank based across Europe and globally. Great conversation, and I like both the Draghi and the Letter reports, and we can talk about grids later. We do lots of grids, but I felt that we're rather missing 2 things. One, the kind of how markets and investment could support the social agenda and social cohesion, and also resilience. It seemed a bit odd after the European climate risk assessment that there was no mention of resilience, which, if you believe the EAA's assessments, if we don't build resilience, we'll lose much more GDP and climate impacts than we'll ever get back on the productivity agenda by 2050. So there were kind of 3 areas which we look at, which we think combine building markets and social benefits for individuals and competitiveness. And I just wondered, in a sense, for the Commissioner, why, in a sense, these haven't been built up? Because it's been promoted for a while. 3 markets. One is construction. We have lots of money not spent on retrofit. We have pretty poor quality infrastructure because construction markets are balkanized across Europe, and DG Competition continually raids our materials companies, concrete and other areas, for anti-competitive behavior repeatedly while we subsidize them through the ETS. So again, with that scenario, it seems that we could get competition and benefits. Second, insurance. Insurance rates across Europe to weather disasters are massively low. Insurance markets are massively balkanized. The Commission has been blocked by member states for producing a single European insurance market. Is that one to tackle, to give people the protection they need? And the third one, smart grids. We're not using the technology we have. Big grids may be behind schedule, but smart grids are really behind schedule. And again, the Energy Union tried to do this, it's been blocked. So really coming back is, why can we struggle, perhaps because economists decide preferences of finding these win-win-win areas, and how can we make sure as we move this forward, we actually touch on those areas with tangible consumer and citizen benefits as well as climate benefits. And these are also the areas where citizens say they dislike corporate sectors the most, if you look at the Commission's polls. So, perhaps one of the issues here is, who's setting our priorities out of these reports, and how do we make sure we get the best rounded outcome, not just one that's tapped towards GDP competition, but broader benefits?
So, given your accent, I'm not going to focus on the Brexit thing, but do you believe the EU is a good thing, though?
Well, as I was officer in Berlin, Brussels, and the majority of my staff work in Europe. Yes, it's not our fault. We campaigned against.
No, I meant I didn't mean that in a cheeky way.
But
the fact that it's full of inertia, not moving fast enough, all these problems. It has,
If you work outside the EU and UK trying to find its place in the world, especially after yesterday, you understand how important the EU is. One of the areas we're looking at is connecting the UK back into European electricity markets. Because it needs to.
Thank you. And thank you for responding to that question. Anna, the delightful Anna, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting discussion about competitiveness, competition, innovation, and all this have to do with the investment in people. So we know, and we have discussed about Draghi report, which is about...
Sorry, just to say, I know you, but some people might know. Says Anna Diamantopoulou, ex-commissioner, etc., and also active in Greece. That's all.
Okay, thank you. I think the most important is that I was chairing a high-level group on the reform of social protection and welfare state. So what I would like to bring in this discussion is that all these have to do with people, investing in people, and I would like to bring you the data. It is the first time after the war that 20% as an average at the European level, 20% of people, of children are in poverty risk. It is the first time. 1 out of 5 children are in poverty risk. Then it is generation A who is coming to the labor market, totally different, with different approaches, culture, and skills. It is generation Z who is now in the labor market, but has a completely different culture, what work is and what they want from their lives. It is totally different than the 45 or 50 years old people, the millennials. And then we are coming to people who are over 35, 40 years old. They are the generation of the crisis. They are not as they were in the past in the salaried work. So there are so many different kind of work which is different than the past, again, in terms of security, etc. And then we're coming to the older generation, and we know that there is an increasing number of people over 80 years old, which means a huge cost for the health system. And we know now that in the majority of member states, the pension systems are not stable. So taking them all this into account, I think it is not a separate chapter of the discussion. It is part of our reality. And just to link them with the elections in the United States, I think that these were the symptoms which have led to this situation in the United States. So competition, competitiveness, innovation have to do with investment in social policy. And this is always a national issue. Of course, the Commission has done a lot of work in these 5 years. And I think Nicholas is here and we have to congratulate him because it was in very difficult situations. But please, we have to take it continuously into account when we're talking about economy.
Thank you very much. And you've been a commissioner, and so I suppose when you look at the new commission and what the commission that's operated in the past 4 years so far, and you look ahead to the college that's emerging, do you have the confidence that they get this point that you're making?
I have seen that's why I have referred to Commissioner. I have referred to Nicholas because he had tried a lot. Now he is not in the skin anymore, but I cannot make any kind of predictions for the new commission.
Are you being diplomatic, Anna?
Sorry?
Are you being diplomatic?
Okay, I'm not very optimistic. Okay.
There we go. Excellent. Okay. Another European young leader, and then I'll move. Nicholas, I'm going to bring you in, if I may, in a moment. But first, introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Xavier. I'm an entrepreneur and a citizen. I'm also the CEO of a company in Delaware, so I totally understand. That being said, there is something that fundamentally bothers me in the entire conversation here, is that if you ever noticed, we are facing more and more crises. Some people call the poly-crisis or the meta-crisis, and yet I think that we are not addressing the root of it. Right? We say that we cannot discover a new world with an old map. And yet we are still blindsided by this old map of competition. I'm tired. I'm the internet generation. I'm tired of this world competition. I don't want to compete. I want to complete. Right? We have enough crises in our hand, and we don't have enough of us that actually have no time to waste competing with anyone. So actually, the Delaware company just works. So what I understand, and I was also very supportive as part of the Startup Manifesto of that. And sure, let's get it done. But again, I feel like we are going where the puck is instead of going where the puck is going to be. Do we still need more vehicles to compete? I'd love to see more vehicles to actually embrace this age, this digital age, the internet age, where we actually collaborate. And so I'm glad to hear that we're looking for a new title, because when I hear your title, like trying to make Vice President for Europe fit for the digital age and Commissioner for Competition, it doesn't feel like it goes really well together. I mean, the internet is about collaborating. It's not about so much about competition as much as we think it is. Competition is about making winners and losers. But we are all different. And it's part of our European values that we are uniting in our diversity, that we all have a different piece of the puzzle. And so I'd love to see a commissioner for the making Europe fit for the digital age, but in embracing this idea of collaboration. And so yeah, that's basically what I would love to invite everyone to think about is how can we stop this story of separation? How can we basically create the soul on this European continent to unite in our diversity and make people collaborate to face all of those crises, to become more resilient, stop pursuing GDP efficiency. It creates very fragile institutions. We need to shoot for more decentralization and more resilience, more robustness. So that's my invitation.
You can't. You also you come to a Friends of Europe event. You get diversity of views, and that's great. That's the best thing about it. I'm going to bring you in as well. But Nicholas, if I may, you have been invoked. And you've been, you may not have skin in the game, but you have experience, and so you know how the system is worked or how badly it's working. Give us your take. You're free now to say whatever you want to say. I think so.
Okay. No. First, thank you very much for this debate. Very, very rich and very stimulating also. And I would say that we have two important and interesting reports, Letta and. Mario Draghi, I would add another report, unfortunately, that had less publicity, which was the future of our social welfare system. And finally, when we are reflecting, competitiveness is not an aim in itself. Now we have the idea competitiveness, yes, but competitiveness is a tool. It's not an aim in itself. And this is the message which is absolutely important also to give to the millions of people you described at the beginning who are excluded, who, when they hear the word competitiveness, they have the feeling that they will be even more the victims as they are already today. So I think this is the reflection, how our societies are organized and what we can do better. And I am certainly very much in favor of, we have to work on our economy. That's clear. We have lost a lot of productivity for different reasons, but at the end, we have to keep our society together. Because what we are seeing in the US is not a good example. They may be competitive in some areas. Obviously, they are in new technologies, and Draghi says it very clearly. Productivity in the US is mainly about new technologies. The difference, the gaps between US and Europe is mainly the gap between the technology. We are not good enough in new technologies in IT and so on, artificial intelligence and so on. So I think this is the big issue is now about how to work on the economy, how to strengthen competitiveness, and at the same time to keep our societies together. So this balance has to be guaranteed. Now, if you ask me, are you optimistic for the next commission? Well, I would like that what we have started continues. And that when we are discussing about social, that does not mean just adding burdens to existing burdens. I agree that certainly there might be some over-regulation, bad regulation, but that's a shared responsibility between, on one hand, the EU. The EU is not an abstract entity. The EU is also member states. And its parliament, its member states, and so on. But also national responsibility with the gold plating, adding to already complex text some other complex provisions. So I think the point is now to make sure that we have this balanced approach we had during the 5 years. And because I was invoked, I would say we had a very good cooperation between the Commissioner on Competition and the Commissioner responsible for social. And we never had a really conflict between both. Certainly we do not share all approaches, but that's diversity. But I think we had a very good cooperation. And that I would wish we can continue. Now, I am a bit hesitant. Because we are obsessed now with competition and competitiveness, and we have to balance this. And especially we have also this fragmentation issue, which was mentioned yesterday by Mario Monti. This is the biggest threat, and I fear that what's going on elsewhere, we are not. Competition is okay. We need competition. That would be my response. But we need as much collaboration and cooperation. And that's because I'm, I would say, an admirer of Jacques Delors. And Jacques Delors always put those things together. Competition, yes, but at the same time, cooperation. Now I fear that we are just on the competition side and not enough on the cooperation one.
Thank you. I'm going to bring you in. And thank you for being upfront about your lack of optimism in the new commission. My words, not yours. Gentleman here.
My name is Adem Kumcu. I'm the president of Unity, a confederation representing migrant entrepreneurs in 24 different European countries. And we are now moving forward inclusive entrepreneurship. Including people is so important to build the future of Europe. Exactly 50 years ago, I came to Europe with my brothers and sisters. It was on the 5th of October, was one of the last Orient Express to France, to say exactly. It was a Europe which was self-confident. Europe was the future. And now there are challengers, technological challengers, new countries which are challenging. And I think we are in an identity crisis. We should be more clear about what is our heritage to humanity here in Europe in terms of social cohesion, competitiveness, but also innovativeness. Why are not we hoping of a progressive Europe and we have become populist here in Europe? These are fundamental questions. I think we have the tools to do it, and I am very happy to hear from Margherita that we should be aware of who we are and keep our own identity and authenticity here. If we have to build a future, it will be our own future. Don't be afraid of US or other countries or whatever. We have the means to realize this, but to realize this ambition of smart, social, sustainable, scalable society, civilization, and economy, we need a very clear vision on our unique competitive advantage, clear institutional framework, maybe an innovative institutional framework again, an inclusive, supportive ecosystems at local level, and especially participative governance. Don't be afraid of collective intelligence, collective engagement, entrepreneurial mindset, and I'm in admiration for Joseph Schumpeter's creative destruction. Don't fear to lose sometimes some things to keep what we are really as Europeans and what we mean for the humanity, because 50 years ago I came to this place with hope and I am still in hope, and I'm sure we can realize it. And these are not just lost words, but we need to believe in ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As I said, with diversity of experiences and perspectives is what you get from being here. Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Lubna Bouarfa. I'm an AI scientist turned entrepreneur. Founded a company here in Europe and sold it last year to an American and a Middle Eastern private equity firm. So I came to Europe 24 years ago as a teenager to continue my studies. And I believed in the European dream. We were strong, we had a different vision, and it fits the identity back then. Things changed. Our population changed, and where I stand as one of the tech founders in Europe, we are becoming the museum of the world if we don't change. We are becoming this place that was glorious once and that built castles with regulations, with beautiful cities, and we felt so comfortable that we forgot what it takes to build this. And this is the problem. This is how I see, as someone, I believe in Europe and I build my story here. So now, 2 months ago, I was in Singapore and I saw a different example of a population that is also built from different ethnicities, where in the core values and their founding father, the vision of a makeup of a society where it is about the future and not the past. Temasek, their 50th anniversary, is an investment arm created by government, but it was left to proper investment people to make those investments. Sustainability is in the core, but it is made through this vision. And this is what I feel is missing. We changed. We have now a different population, but we still run the vision through the eye of elitaire, the initial, but we changed. We have immigrants, one of them. We see how our views on the wars is changing, the war in Ukraine versus the war in the Middle East. So we have big portion of young people don't believe in this, right. Seeing the double standards. So we are losing that. And what I see from the tech side, the same type of people, they leave Europe, they go to the US, they go to Asia, and that vision takes them. They work the long hours. It's not about feeling comfortable. It's not about, I want my employer to pay my travel costs and I want this and this. It's then you're part of that vision. And that is what is missing. And if we don't act, I'm afraid we will become that beautiful museum that people come here and look at us and see how it once was. Thank you.
Now, as always, you're always lovely and poetic, and you create that image so extremely well. I mean, you must have had a heavy heart when you sold your company to an American VC, right?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I don't mean. I mean in the sense that at least you're still here, though, and you're still trying to contribute to, making sure there are other different types of technologies emerging. You're doing wonderful things. But in terms of what you just said, do you think it's possible that a kind of, not a sandbox, but a process for being able to accelerate tech entrepreneurs like you?
Create Temasek for Europe.
Okay. All right. That's a clear recommendation. I've got 9 minutes or so left, and I will come back to you, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt. But Val, you wanted to come in, but very briefly, then I'm going to come back to our contributors.
Well, sure. Thank you very much.
Do introduce yourself.
Yeah, Valbona Zanelli. I'm with Friends of Europe and the Atlantic Council of the United States. I hear these conversations, great conversation to have everyone around the table, but I just want to point out that it's not business as usual. We live in an age of disruption, which is broad in scope and global in nature. Europe has become encircled from France is a ring of fire, and the economy is very strongly linked to security. And I don't think that we have a full understanding what is going on. So to take the right decisions. many times the Draghi report was mentioned. I believe that the road to achieving our higher growth rates and competitiveness does not necessarily imply finding additional resources of 800 million a year. I think that's rather the cost of our misplaced policies in Europe. And I think the lower hanging fruit of higher investment and competitiveness actually lie in the integration of the sectors that have been left behind back in the 90s from the single market. And those 4 sectors have been mentioned. I'll start with defense, energy, telecom, and finance. So let's start working on what can be done without looking at additional resources which are not there. We have to be, clear with ourselves.
Indeed, thank you. Thank you for that reminder. I'm going to come back to our, now in this kind of glide path down to closing our opening session, which I have to. And by the way, obviously outside there's been a demonstration, which I self-evident. It wasn't just a party, but I resisted having to mention it until now. I want to first come back to yourself, Antonio, if I may, and then I'll work my way around.
Sure. 2 points. One, an issue that is absent so far from our discussion is the move that we see in European policy and politics about immigration. I'm very concerned about how the European leadership is grabbing the most aggressive anti-immigration stance. Lack of immigration or an adoption of a policy of purely closed borders and investing on building walls and excluding entrance as a problem of reducing the workforce, contributing to the aging of our population, reducing diversity, reducing entrepreneurship. We cannot ignore, of course, the reasons of some discontent. We have seen it in the US, we've seen it here, but the response should not be either open borders fully is not a problem, ignore it, or as apparently we are going, investing in closing borders and building sites outside the EU perimeter to, storage people. There will be a strategy of, of course, delivering better conditions for our population so they will feel secure, but mostly with immigration. One, show better control of the entrances, not closing doors, but better control. So people that feel safe that we are screening, we accept, and then investing fully and a lot on integration. We have to take care of how these immigrants come and which conditions, if they integrate their houses, healthcare, education, if their children come, the wives come, they will be integrated in our societies. They will share, to a certain extent, our constitutional values. I'm not talking about moral and constitutional values. They will integrate and they will contribute. Very concerned about how Europe is going in the direction of immigration. Regarding the question about own resources, very quickly, the answer is potentially yes, under conditions. The conditions are 2. One, we have to gain trust on each other. 15 years ago, we were in a sovereign debt crisis. Portugal was in the spotlight. We had a massive public debt and a massive deficit.
Yes.
We came down in 15 years, 3 sequential governments of different parties. We came down from 130% debt to GDP to 97 this year, 93 next year. We went from an 11% deficit to a second, and we will go to the 3rd year in a row of a surplus, second or best score in Europe now. That allows us to gain trust and be trusted by other governments, national governments, that don't look at us and say, you will spend poorly the money that we'll pull together. So that's one condition. We have to do our role. Second is we have to acknowledge that most Europeans believe that social contract in its financial dimension is that it's stretched. We have contributed the most that we can to what we are getting back. So whatever own resources that are pooled together additionally need 2 conditions. One, they should be gradually used as a replacement for resources extracted or charged in taxes at national level. We are doing that.
Okay.
So decrease our tax burden and income taxes for our people so that we can create more room for them to spend their money, but also to improve this contract. Second, again, improve how we spend. And the idea that this money goes somewhere to a European ether where we don't know where the money is spent, so that should be price tax. The Next Generation EU was a good idea. Again, it goes back to my initial point, stuck in this implementation, and I agree that's an implementation challenge by so many demands, serious, important concerns, but they are dragging the capability of showing that this money that we are charging is actually delivering something because we are not being able to implement it. Thank you.
Do you have this conversation with your colleagues across the member states?
Yes,
and?
Sure. And well, not all agree. It's part of the conversation, but you can trust me. I'm only in the job for 6 months and I will keep working on it.
I know you are. We'll count on you to come back next year and tell us more and what's happening in the, in that conversation. I'm being told I need to close this off, and I won't for the moment. Because I need to hear from at least 2 more people. So I want to ask, basically, Sylvain, did you want to say anything very, very quickly?
Yeah, Europe has an investment gap. We need to fix it. And, policy making is complex trade-off, but let's just be more binary. Does it favor investment in a non-fragmented way? We should do it. Does it not favor investment in a non-fragmented way? Probably we shouldn't do it.
Okay. Straight to the point. Thank you very much. Rami.
Very quickly, I would like to invite all policymakers. Anyone is welcome. Please come to our R&D center in Brussels, end of January. You're welcome. Let's talk how we can collaborate.
Isn't that a great outcome? That's wonderful. So please do take it up. And you mean that, right? And will you put on green technology transport to get to your R&D facility as well? Because it's quite far away, isn't it?
It's an Anderlecht, right around the corner.
Okay, excellent. Please, you heard that here. Coca-Cola is offering to open up its R&D knowledge and capacity to all of you here, especially the public sector, so do take it up. Now, last but not least, Madam, I come to you to respond to some of the issues and, to be, obviously come back to some of the challenges that you've heard around here, but I really want to hear from you in terms of your reflection on the college that's emerging. As someone who's been at the heart of, let's say, the storm in many ways, where you've had to challenge some of the biggest companies, and you've done some remarkable things. Do you sort of, as you look ahead to the new commission, new college, what's your reflections? What are your lessons to them? What would you say on the postcard to Ursula von der Leyen that my darling, these are 3 or 4 things you've got to continue to do, or you must start doing differently? I said I would be direct with you.
Yeah, no, you're more than welcome. Javier, it's quite rare that one can have wishes fulfilled once they're spoken out. I can fulfill yours. We have less competition. We just looked at competition, how it developed due to market dynamics over the last 25 years in Europe. Markups are going up, profits are going up, concentration is going up. The one effect of that is loss of GDP and wage inequality. This is what it has given us. And if you want to question growth as such, I think we have a very important discussion ahead of us. Because for me, growth is not a problem. Exploitation of our planet and of people is the problem. And I, for one, will continue whatever I can do to make sure that we can provide for that social welfare state that Nico was also mentioning, and that has been the common theme around this table. And less competition, in my view, is not part of it. What we see when we have less competition is less innovation, higher prices, less choice, and less resilience in the value chain, because if you only have one supplier, what if something happens? Just not necessarily evil, but just a fire or flooding. We just saw that. It's devastating. The second point, and I think this is very well done, talking about what member states can do. Member states can do business. We talk a lot about how can we support. How can we support SMEs? We have endless SME support programs. Well, businesses want business. And we have, enabling things for governments to ask for smaller businesses to provide services for them. That is something that could get started so that we do not get trapped in those headlines of Europe is regulating, US is innovating, China is copying. If only China was copying, oh my God, they're innovating. And this idea that the US is a heaven of no red tape, well, good luck. You should go explore. I have friends who try to sell to public entities in the US. It's a time-consuming effort. I think it's really, really important not to talk about what we want to spend, but what we want to have. I think it's really important that we have a common European grid, digitalized, that really works for all that renewable energy to be present where you need it. Second, that we have European rails that we can get with fast-speed train between one city to the other one. That captures imagination. Then you want to finance. But just to discuss how to pile money doesn't capture any kind of imagination. So I think we need to start there. And for how to get EU Inc., well, don't send it to Draghi. Send it to Ursula von der Leyen. She's the decision maker here. She's the one who can push it. Send it to Séjourné and send it to the people who will be in his hearing on the 12th of this month so that they can discuss. Because already now there is this vision to create the 28th regime. So any detail that can make that happen fast, I think will be more than welcome. But don't wait. It's today that you need to press that send button. And you asked about the new commission. What I see is very strong, tested leadership.
Okay.
Ursula did amazing in that first mandate, which was hit with a pandemic, energy crisis, inflation, war on our continent. This is a tested leader. She has a counterpart in Costa, on the other side of the street, which is a tested, amazing leader who has done, great things for his country, and it's never about him. Actually, we have leadership at the top level who has been tested, who have proven themselves, that we know of as European. And if you go through the college, you have people with experience who are not about themselves, who have ambitions on behalf of Europe. They are now being tested by our elected representatives. I have a lot of trust in that new commission because, as always, with the state of Europe, the whole of Europe needs to be much, much better than the individual parts. Because when you go through the individual parts, slight depression maybe. So that common Europe of ours need, as always, to deliver so that we claim and develop that place in the world that we have created and that delivers to citizens. And that is what makes us Europeans, that everybody counts here. Thank you very much.
But absolutely, thank you very much for that. But no, because you haven't really answered my question in the sense that, and I love the fact that your leadership is obviously shines through in the way that you've celebrated colleagues and looked at the ability of so many of your colleagues to do the right thing. What would you've been in the eye, you've been in the system, you've been in the college conversations. What do you think they should stop doing, and what do you think they should start doing more of, or is it just all okay for the moment from your perspective?
No, the challenge for any administration, it is to prevent siloing. Because any administration, the natural form of administration is a silo. This is what it grows into if left unattended. Like a carrot knows how to become a carrot, and the administration know how to become a silo. So you really, really, really need to push for those silos to break down and for real collaboration to work, for real discussions to take place, and also to keep each other in check, because sometimes interests are opposite. If we really want that single market, and thank you very much for mentioning that again and again and again, because that is the real key to prosperity in Europe and for EU Inc. Actually to work, well, then the college needs to agree that this is the one priority. And sometimes other wishes, they have to be subordinated to that. And since progress is always about people who want to create that progress, talk more with each other. Make sure that all your representatives speak on behalf of you to find solutions and not to defend your turf.